Just before I start, I met Kish and Louise in the park yesterday, and Kish was telling me all about how God has been speaking to him about the importance of co-workers in the kingdom. You know, it's so important that everything we do in the church is we're a part of a team. And it occurred to me that when you're preaching, it's the most solo-looking thing. You know, we've seen how these guys work wonderfully together and share the leadership and bring harmony and contribute to each other. We've seen a beautiful picture of that. But actually, I just really felt that after I'd spoken to Kish, that it was the Holy Spirit was speaking to me about making sure I honoured my co-workers. So you need to know that when we start to develop like what we're going to preach about, there's a group of people that meet and pray, a preaching team and the leadership team of the church. We meet and we pray and we talk, and then we share ideas and we share books and videos, and we get excited about what God is saying together. And it's a community thing. It's not an individual thing. And then I need to honour, today especially, I need to honour Pastor Leo and Arafe, who translated stuff for me to put on the PowerPoint so that we can continue in this amazing expression of togetherness and involving our family together. So I want to honour you. I even want to honour Katie, who decorated the cake that is my visual aid. We do these things in community. And actually, Priya, who did this beautiful thing and who helps us put together the PowerPoints every week. You know, this is as much team and as much community as the other stuff. So, you know, honour to you guys for that. So, we ended last week with a party. The whole village have been invited. I've made a little tea party here, but this is a very British party. I'm thinking that the party we're talking about is a wilder, more raucous party. When we were in Cyprus, we had these friends, this group of lads from Pakistan who were students there, and we invited them around once for my birthday for cake. And so, we did a proper British, cake. And before I knew it, they'd pushed all of the furniture back. And there was loud music playing, and we were dancing. In the middle, there was, whooping and dancing and wildness instead of my little British party. And I think that's the kind of party that this is. This is interestingly a wild, extravagant, expensive party. Okay, the fatted calf, what that means is this is an extravagant, expensive party, a celebration. So just hold on to that thought. Because this is, and I'm just going to give you a little recap for those of you who weren't here last week. This is number 3 in a series of 3 stories that Jesus told together, and he told them as a result of this. Just at the beginning of Luke chapter 15. Now, the tax collectors and sinners, that is all of the people everybody else dislikes, they were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who are the local experts in looking down on other people, they muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, Ali told us last week that to eat with people in this culture meant to welcome them as your own. It was a way of honouring people. But it also, if you ate with the wrong people, could make you unclean. So they're suggesting that Jesus is not taking sin seriously enough, that he's allowing himself to become unclean, and does he not know what he's doing? So there's more than a little bit of "I'm better than you" going on here. The Pharisees are "I'm better than those sinners and tax collectors." That's not even on the table. That's not even a question. That's a known. But there's a little bit of a, we're better than you going on with Jesus here. And Jesus, interestingly, doesn't come in with a speech about table fellowship. And he doesn't come in with a speech about how you can keep yourself clean. He doesn't even come in with a speech about holiness. He tells these 3 stories, which are all about a search, a rescue, and a party. So he totally ignores where they're coming from. And he comes with this thing about something that's lost, something that's made itself lost, maybe. A search, a rescue, and a party. We've had a sheep. There were 100 sheep. We lost one. There was a search. There was a rescue. There was a party. There was a coin. There were 10 coins, and one was lost. Like, stakes are up. There was a search. There was a rescue, kind of. Like, presumably she pulled it out the cracks in the floorboards or whatever. And then there was a party. So Jesus has upped the ante from what they've accused him of, which is welcoming and eating, and he's upped it to searching for and partying. Okay? So you think I welcome them? You think I eat with them? Well, let me tell you, okay? Searching and partying. So, the story so far is that there was a son. So there, can you imagine? You've heard the 100 sheep and the one that's gone missing. You've heard the 10 coins and the one that's gone missing. And then Jesus comes in. There was a man with 2 sons. Like there's a moment in the room at that point. Oh, one's going to get lost. Yeah, we've heard 2 stories. We're getting the pattern. So there's a moment in the room. And then we hear this story of the boy who leaves home and he cuts himself off from relationship with his father. It's not like Isaac leaving home and us all cheering and celebrating because God has done something brilliant in his life. No, this is the guy kind of like Alice said last week, saying to his dad, well, actually, I wish you were dead. And can I have the money now? And if that means you have to sell stuff, so be it. And then he disappears and he's cut himself off. And he's not just cut himself off from relationship with a father, but actually he's cut himself off from the blessing of presence with his father and the generosity of his father. Because he's just said, I just want what's due to me. So he's cut himself off from the generosity of the father. He's cut himself off from the presence. But then he's also, and that's the blessing, but he's also cut himself off from his birthright. Like, we don't get this because we live in a society where you don't stay living at home with your parents in the West. Mostly, eventually, we hope. But actually, in this society, you were going to inherit this land and this farm and these animals. This is your future. This is your destiny. This is your provision for the future, and it is what's been handed down to your family, which your family has grown for generations and generations. This birthright. And this is where your identity rests, and this is where your purpose rests, and this is where your belonging is. And this son walked away from it all. And interestingly, he lost all of that money in a wild, expensive, extravagant way. But he was wasting it. The word prodigal means to live expensively and wastefully. That's what he did. And then you know that the next part of the story is that he gets to a point where he's hungry. And his hunger drives him back to the village. Because the only plan that he can come up with to get himself out of this fix that he's got is to go back and to grovel to his dad and say, can you pay for me to have an apprenticeship? That's what we learned about last week. And then what we saw last week was that do you remember that? Anyone who was here? That running father? You see, the thing was that the son, because he's lost all his money in the land of the Gentiles, there's an enormous amount of shame. And if he'd had to walk through the village to his father's house, then all of the village would have come out and chucked stuff at him and shouted at him and berated him, particularly all the small boys of the village, because they didn't really have anything else to do. That's what they'd have done. He'd have had this walk of shame to the father's house. But the father doesn't let him do that. The father runs out to him and meets him on the edge of the village. And the father shames himself by running so that he can restore the son to a position of sonship and then walk him back through the village. So there's a rescue in this story. that sometimes we don't see. Like, I've known this story since I was small. Somehow, in my head, when I hear this story, I think that the prodigal son is a crocodile. Because the book that I had when I was little, it was a prodigal son. The prodigal son was a crocodile. Yeah? So I've walked with this story a really long time, but it's only recently that I've learned that the father was prepared to shame himself to come out to the edge of the village to rescue the younger son and to restore him to sonship and to walk him home. So that's the story so far. And we end with a party. Yay! Just like the other 3 stories. Like, everyone's there thinking, right, yep, we've heard this now. We know what happens. There's rescue. And then there's a party. So maybe what's going on is that they are thinking, okay, well, what we've learned is that God really loves to rescue those who've lost themselves, and he loves to celebrate it. And okay, so, and I guess that they probably thought that Jesus was finished then. But then, there's a twist. There's another son, and he's lost too. That's a bit they weren't expecting. Okay, and I think that this is maybe the bit that was really aimed at those Pharisees with their self-righteousness and their resentment. So let's have a look at it. Meanwhile, this is from Luke chapter 15. If you want to follow along on a phone or even a paper Bible, should you still own one of those? Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. Flashing lights, maybe not. So he called one of the servants and he asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." That's quite interesting, that safe and sound at the end there actually has echoes of the word in the Old Testament, which is shalom. Like, it's not just like he's like relatively unharmed. It's actually he's back. There is peace. There is restoration. And so the older brother ran into the party, hugged his dad, and celebrated with him. No? No, like we know it didn't go down like that. That might be what would be expected, but we know that that's not what down. What we know is that the older brother became angry and he refused to go in. And I'm thinking he made it obvious that he was refusing to go in some way. He stood outside and he was obviously sulky. So the father went out and pleaded with him. Do you hear that? The father went out to the edge of the village to meet the younger son. And then the father goes out to the edge of the party to meet the older son, where he is being sulky and resentful. And this is what he says in reply to the father. He answers his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes home who squandered all your property with prostitutes, and you kill the fatted calf for him," there's quite a lot going on there, isn't there? What's going on for the elder? There's quite a lot going on. So here he is. He's outside the party. And what we're hearing from him, some of the things that he's got wrong, maybe, are that he's been I've been slaving for you. I've been doing the right thing. Does he know that the father approves of him and loves him? Does that sound like somebody who feels loved and approved of? I've been slaving for you all this time and you never. Does that sound like somebody who's living in that place of identity and birthright and belonging? He's missed it. Even though he's been there all along, he's missed it. And I think, now this is my guess, but I think that resentment must have been building up for a while. Because in this moment, it sort of bursts out in ugliness. I think it's been building, that feeling of not being noticed, of trying hard and not ever being quite good enough, that feeling of not being loved or not being appreciated or not belonging. Because then he says things like, I didn't even have a goat to celebrate with my friends. Like, you see how that younger son got driven back because of hunger? And like here we see the older son just the same. I was hungry. I didn't have the food I needed. I couldn't party with my friends. It wasn't, I don't feel part of it was not, I need to go and make a family over here with my friends where I can celebrate. I need to make a family over here because I'm not part of that one. I'm going to make a little family with just my mates. And you didn't let me, or you didn't give it to me. And there's a sense in which he is also cut off. Even in his obedience and in his being there, he's also cut off, and he's cut off from these same things. He's cut off from a sense of the Father's generosity. Even though it's there, he's blind to it. And he's cut off from the sense of the Father's presence with him because he's choosing to go off and have a party with his friends instead. And he's not feeling like he's got this identity and purpose and birthright because actually what the Father then says to him is, my son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours, already yours. You're already living in that place of blessing, but somehow you've become blinded to it. And then you have this like beautiful little turnaround. This brother of yours, you know. So the older son comes in, this son of yours. Actually, do you know when he comes in and does that, this son of yours thing, and he says, oh, he's been off with prostitutes. Like, that's not in Jesus' story at the beginning. It's just extravagant, wild, expensive living. This prostitutes thing is an attempt, well, it's gossip, isn't it? And it's speculation, but it's also an attempt to get this guy, out of the picture forever, because actually under their local law, he would have been stoned or at least cut off forever, no chance of ever coming back. It's a bit of a Jonah kind of thing going on there, like his reluctance to see the people forgiven. It's quite interesting, isn't it? So this is what the Father says. And then the ball is squarely in the court of the older brother. Here's the party. You're invited. It's actually, one of the things that's I really noticed about this is that the older son comes in and says, you've thrown a party for this useless younger brother. You never threw me a party. But actually, when you read backwards, the father throws the party for himself. He's throwing the party to celebrate for himself, and all of his family are invited. He is celebrating his joy, his overwhelming joy at the restoration of this lost child. And it's his party. It's not a party for the kids. It's a party for the father, and the father is inviting the older son to come and share his joy. Like, God is generous with his joy. You know, when God is joyful about something, he doesn't keep it to himself. He is generous with his joy. You know, we saw that a bit this morning. Like, we're joyful over Isaac going out to serve God. We're not as joyful as the Father is, but he's letting us share that joy. We get to live a life of celebration in the kingdom because we get to share in the Father's joy because of his generosity in it. But here is the older brother standing outside the party with the ball in his court, and Jesus leaves it hanging like an episode of a Marvel TV series. Like, we are all saying, what happens next? And he doesn't tell us. Because what's happening next is that those Pharisees have heard him say, here you are with your self-righteousness and your resentment, and you are invited in. Don't worry, I'm watching the clock. You are invited in, and there is a place for you, but it is your choice. The ball is in your... You can come and share my joy. You're still my son. You know, the father doesn't come in at that point, does he? And say, right, that's it, you ungrateful toad. Be off with you. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, you're no longer my son. He just says, look, come and share my joy. This is why we're joyful. Come and share it. It's an invitation to come and share in the Father's joy. So I thought to myself when I was walking in the park, how do I identify with this story? I'm not a Pharisee. I haven't got a beard. Definitely not going to be setting myself up as somebody who's good at keeping the rules. Like, or tidy. That was the Pharisees must have been really, really tidy and neat about things. Nope. So how do I identify with this? And I thought, well, here's the thing. Sometimes God's generosity is quite hard to take. God reminded me when I was thinking about this of when I used to sit in meetings thinking, why is that person getting a word from the front from the scary prophet and I'm not? Why do I never get a word in meetings? Then it happened one day and it was terrifying. Anyway, why do I never get a word in meetings? Why is God blessing that person and not blessing me? And I wasn't sharing in the joy. I was just feeling a little bit grumpy and a bit resentful and a bit like things were unfair, and maybe God wasn't noticing me because everyone was celebrating something else instead. And then God reminded me about how I have felt maybe even recently around other people's healing when people I love are not being healed and are really struggling. And how hard it is to rejoice in seeing someone else get healed, and when you see somebody else get their blessing, and how hard it is to step into the Father's joy of that. I mean, this is real. This is what it's really like, isn't it? I'm a bit older son in those moments, and then God reminded me of when I had a long time before we had Katie, I had a miscarriage on the day that my friend gave birth to their son. And now this took a really long time. I had about 6 months to a year of looking at that baby and being reminded that God had blessed them, but for some reason I'd experienced this tragedy of losing a child. And in that time, God wasn't saying to me that I shouldn't be grieving or that what happened to me wasn't important. But what he was saying, and what I eventually got hold of, was that there is an invitation into other people's joy, and that I'm able to step into that, and there is something about growing up in the kingdom, which is that thing where God supernaturally, by the power of the Holy Spirit, enables you to step into other people's joy, even when you're experiencing not joy. Yeah? Even when you're in that place, frankly, of jealousy and enviousness and annoyance with God that he hasn't answered your prayer, but he has answered theirs, that there is a maturity that comes by the power of the Spirit in being able to step into this joy and still celebrate in what God is doing. And that is tough. I had a picture of this morning. I was standing in the creche, and there's this yellow and red car You know, the yellow one, it's called a Little Tykes Cozy Coupe, for those of you who haven't had one in their life. But for a long time, like a really long time, it was my Johnny, who is now 22, it was his favourite toy. Like, you know, he would fight to the death for that at a playgroup to get into the little red car. And he really loved it. But as I was looking at it this morning, I just remembered how inappropriate it would be for him to try and get into it now at 6'3". Yeah, 6'3" rugby player trying to fold yourself into a tiny little Tykes coupe. Now, what's appropriate for him now is that he learns to drive an actual car that actually goes somewhere, not a little car. And it just, you know, there was just something going on in me that just said, oh, it's time to grow up and to step up. It's time to grow up and step in. And to believe that even in our place of pain, that we don't have to stay like the older brother in this place of resentment. We don't have to stay in this place of just feeling like the world is unfair. We can step into the party and celebrate the beauty of what God is doing. You know, we sang that earlier. Even when we don't see it, He's working. Even when we don't feel it, He's working because of who He is. And we don't want to get stuck in this place of standing outside of God's party. He'll let us. He'll still call us child. He'll still call us son. He'll still call us daughter. But He says, come in and celebrate with me. I read this, Tom Wright wrote this about the older brother, that his problem was that he could only see the bad, and he was blind to the beauty. He was blind to the beauty of what God was doing. And I just felt God say that, like, let's just, if you feel like, if this is ever true of you, that sometimes resentment or disappointment or just a sort of Jonah-ish thing to say, why are they getting attention when they used to be bad? You know, if that ever crops up, then God is not wanting to say, you terrible toad, get out of here, to you. What He is wanting to say is, come into the party. And Jesus came to give sight to the blind. If you need to see more beauty so that you can celebrate, I think I do, then He came to give sight to the blind. This is an invitation to ask God to give you the ability to see the beauty of what He's doing so that you can have the power to do the growing up thing of stepping out of the place of resentment and crossness and step into the place of joining God in His party of celebration over a million things. I had a sense, actually, that when Isaac was speaking, that for some of us, even that's hard. Because, you know, here at Adam and Karina, with a son who has grown up and is going out to serve the Lord. And for some of us, there are kids who we love who are not following Jesus. And actually, you know, there's a little bit that says, well, this is kind of unfair. And it's hard to then celebrate with you guys. Because there's a little bit of something that's holding us back in this place of saying it's unfair. But let me tell you about this story. There is no unfairness in this story. The father goes out to both sons. He offers them both the chance to join in his party. They are both sons, and they are both still sons in his eyes. There is forgiveness available for both of them. And the father endures as much shame from the village, from the older son, who has just shamed him in front of the whole village by saying, I'm not coming in. The father is prepared to endure as much shame by just going out to him as he was going out to the younger son. It's not like this son is being good right now. He is basically having a bit of a paddy in front of everybody. We know what that's like. So, there's no punishment in this story. There's no shame in this story. God rescues both of those boys from all of their shame. And he invites them into a party which is wild and extravagant and expensive. Everything that younger son thought he wanted. It's right here at home in the generosity of the Father. So, I'm going to pray. And if you think you might need a little bit more ability to see the beauty, if you think that maybe there's a call in there to you as well to grow up, to stand into, to step into the ability to celebrate in God's party, then now's the time. Now, you might want someone to pray for you about that, but you might need to just do it where you are right now. So I'm going to pray. Father, thank you that you invite us into a life which is simultaneously a life of servanthood and of sonship and of partying. A party that is wild and extravagant and expensive, and which we are invited to as sons of the family.